Good afternoon. We're gathered here today to give thanks for the life of Mike Nickel. Husband, father, grandfather, uncle, cousin, colleague, friend. We come to celebrate his life and grieve his loss, and to be reminded again of the eternal love that comes from God. The congregation of First Presbyterian Church of San Rafael welcomes you here today. Mike's family is grateful for your presence. Your presence here as you share your love and support and gratitude. The journey of grief is made more bearable when we walk it together. We are videotaping this service, and by Monday afternoon, a recording of the service will be posted on the church YouTube channel website. So you can go to the church website and find the link there. Later in the service today, there will be an opportunity for anyone who'd like to share a memory or story about Mike. We will pass the microphone around. And following the service, we'll have a reception in Knowles Hall. As you go out the sanctuary, turn to your right and go down the hallway. The reception is hosted by our deacons of the church. And there's a table of wonderful photographs and some memorabilia to remind us about Mike and his full life. Let us join our hearts in prayer. Holy and gracious God, who is the source of life, you are ever present, filling us with your love and light. Show us now your grace as we face the mystery of death. Bless this time as we remember Mike and what he meant to each one gathered here. Comfort and guide us. Open each one to your love through the music, stories shared, pictures, prayers, and silence. In our sadness and grief, may we know your peace. Amen. One of the ministries Mike was very involved with here was our contemplative spirituality ministry, and he was part of the Wednesday morning centering prayer group. You'll hear a little more about that today. But I was struck by Mike, who was a lover of words and a lover of good poetry and writing. And just recently on the Wednesday morning, that group often shares a reading or a prayer. And I was looking at it and I thought, I remember reading this before. And as I went back through my emails, Mike had commented on this a little over a year ago as one of the poems that really struck him. So I want to offer it today as we remember Mike and his love of well-written words that point us to deeper truths. Liminality by Carrie, Newcomer. So much of what we know lives just below the surface. Half of a tree spreads out beneath our feet. living simultaneously in two worlds, each half informing and nurturing the whole. A tree is either and neither, but mostly both. I am drawn to liminal spaces, the half-tamed and unruly patch where the forest gives way and my little garden begins, where water, air, and light overlap, becoming mist on the morning pond. I like to sit on my porch steps, barn jacket and boots, in the last long exhale of the day, when bats and birds loop in and then out, one rising to work, one readying to sleep. And although the moon, full moon, calls the currents and the dark moon reminds me that my best language has always emerged out of silence, it is in the waxing and waning where I most often live, neither here nor there, but simply on my way. There are endings and beginnings, one emerging out of the other, but most days I travel in an ever-present and curious now. A betwixt and between, that is almost, but not quite, the beautiful, but not yet. I've been learning to live with what is, more patient with the process, to love what is becoming, and the questions that keep returning. I am learning to trust the horizon I walk toward, that is an orientation and not a destination, and that I will keep catching glimpses of something great and luminous from the corner of my eye. I am learning to live where losses hold fast and grief lets loose and unravels, where a new kind of knowing can pick up the thread, where I can slide palms with a paradox and nod at the dawn as the shadows pull back and spirit meets bone. Reading from the Hebrew Scriptures, one of the psalms, one of the poems, one of the songs of the Hebrew people. And in this congregation, we use a variety of translations of Scripture. And one we sometimes use is called the Common English Version. I'd like to share that version of Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. God lets me rest in grassy meadows and leads me to restful waters and restores my soul. The Holy One guides me in proper paths for the sake of a good name. And when I walk through the darkest valley, I fear no danger, because you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they protect me. You set a table for me right in front of my enemies. You bathe my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy will pursue me all the days of my life, and I will live in God's house forever. And reading from the New Testament, from Paul's letter to the early church in Rome. reminding them that in the midst of challenges and suffering, they were not alone. From Romans chapter 8. Who will separate us from the love of Christ? Will hardship or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword? No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through the one who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ. I arrived here 4.5 years ago to serve as the pastor of the church, and Mike was one of the first people I met in the congregation as I began. He usually came to the 8:30 service, our early contemplative service. We meet across the hall entryway in the chapel. In our early conversations, he struck me as a quiet person and a kind person. And one of the joys for me was that once a month, Mike and I stood together at the communion table, not this one, but the one in the chapel, to lead the liturgy of the Lord's Supper of communion. And it meant a lot to Mike, and it meant a lot to me to do that together every month. And of course, he always had his signature bow tie and looked dapper, even at 8:30 in the morning. Mike was caring. A caring person, and I and others noticed the way he cared for Darlene, his second wife. Toward the end of her life, she developed dementia that continued to get worse. And I noticed that Mike often brought her when she was able to come, either to the 8:30 or to this later service at 10, and would find the right place for her to sit, was so loving and reassuring to her, patient, respectful, always a consummate gentleman. It was my honor to work with Mike and Alex and their family to plan and lead Darlene's memorial service in 2020, when we couldn't gather. And Mike and I figured out a way, we'll record it here in the sanctuary. And part of what struck me at that time was how much Mike loved to dance, and how much Mike and Darlene loved music, and how he picked special pieces from the 30s and 40s to include in that service. I looked back through my notes. He said, now, at our wedding, our first dance was to You Brought a New Kind of Love to Me, written in 1930 by Sammy Fain, Irving Cahal, and Pierre Norman. It was a big hit by Bing Crosby. And he said Darlene also liked Tonight We Love, and we both love Over the Rainbow. So, include all of those. Mike was incredibly thoughtful. One member of the church told me that after her husband died very suddenly, and she was struggling with her grief and loss, Mike sent a lovely letter to her about his own experience of grief, and sent her a book by Madeleine L'Engle a two-part invention, a story of a marriage, about Madeline L'Engle's loss of her husband and how helpful that book was to her. Another example of his kindness was a couple years ago. We had a seminary intern, Chitoka Webb. Chitoka loves to dress in beautiful colors and all kinds of colors of eyeglasses and a bow tie. And she had struggled a little bit. And Mike had noticed. And one morning, she said, "Would you show me how to properly tie my bow tie?" Which, of course, Mike was delighted to do. Mike often sent note cards and emails to people after an event or a program, thanking them, commenting, appreciation. Again, so thoughtful. We know he was a great dresser, and one of our members, Steve Astle, shared a memory with me. He wrote, "Certainly Mike enjoyed dressing well in a classic tailored clothing, bow ties, and bench-made English shoes." Mike sometimes told me stories about when and where he had acquired something he was wearing, and one time he approached me after worship and said he had something to tell me, and that he feared I might take it the wrong way. I had no idea what he was going to say, but I said, "Please just tell me," and he confessed that he admired the way I dressed. And he felt a little awkward saying this to a man, but he was grateful and admirable. I admired many things about Mike. He certainly was a voracious reader. And in this last year or so, when he was starting to imagine maybe he was going to move, and he needed to downsize and sort through, I think he said 5,000 books, but it was in the thousands. And he said, "Cynthia, I've always wanted ceiling to floor bookshelves and one of those rolling ladders." He said, "Do you think they'll let me do that at Villa Marin? Can I put that in?" He was hoping. He was a devoted University of Washington alumni Husky fan, as you probably know. I went to the University of Oregon, and I'm a very proud Oregon Duck, and we had some lively discussions about this. Depending how our teams did the day before, who was victorious. I got an email from him one time. There was an atmospheric river coming through the Bay Area, and I had to make the decision to cancel one of our evening services. He sent me the following email. "A duck who can't deal with a little wet weather? I am shocked. I am saddened. But looking at the forecast, as prudent Presbyterians, we might want to form a committee to start thinking about building an ark." One of his colleagues from the IJ sent this remark to include today. Joe Conte from the IJ, who worked with Mike for many years. He wrote, "The speaker at Mike's service must be made aware that Mike will likely be taping the memorial service from his seat at the 50-yard line viewing later, because his focus on Saturday afternoon will clearly be on the Washington State game scheduled at 1 o'clock today. He hopes that his beloved Huskies will try to stay undefeated and improve their shot at a national title. He wrote, "I never thought a guy would look good in a husky sweatshirt and bow tie. But if anyone can pull it off, it is Mike." The only thing I'll say in relation to that is the Huskies are playing the Ducks on Friday night. And I wish I could talk to Mike. I appreciated Mike's graciousness. He gave me a great compliment early on. He wrote to me, "I think you're doing a fine job at the 8:30 service. Your sermons are not too long." I repeat, your sermons are not too long. He was a person who was a lifelong learner, both heart and mind. In one of our later conversations, he said his interest in Christian theology and spirituality were sparked by Marcus Borg and a book study that took place in this congregation in the 1970s. Marcus Borg wrote a book, Meeting Jesus Again for the First Time. And that was a pivotal book for many people, including Mike. And he said he thought if this book reflects the kind of conversations and questions at the First Presbyterian Church in San Rafael, then this church might be a good fit for me. Mike participated, as I said, in the Centering Prayer Group and with other spirituality ministry programs through the years. And at the time of our 150th anniversary, which was held in 2019, Mike offered these reflections. One of my most memorable church moments actually took place at home. 10 or so years ago, I returned from one of the Wednesday morning spirituality sessions led by Reverend Collette and Barbara Alexander, and told Darlene that we were going to start a series on how to build self-esteem. In the best imitation of self-deprecating comment that I could manage, I said that I thought I didn't have any problem with self-esteem. And Darlene replied, "I think you do." I said, "Really?" "Yes," she said, "too much of it." He went on to say, that aside, the spirituality program begun by Kay 19 years ago has been a blessing and a rare one. 10 years ago, I was asked to call on other churches in Marin County and all the Presbyterian churches in the Presbytery, which extends from the Golden Gate Bridge to the Oregon border, to see what kind of adult education and spirituality programs they had. I found none that were in any way similar to what we were doing. The question about a spirituality program often elicited this response: "Spirituality program? What's that?" So I have felt blessed to have had Kay, Barbara, Lorna, Wertz, and the Reverend Jan Reynolds as spiritual mentors. Show me a team like that in any other church, big or small. Check it out. It changed my life. It could change yours. The last 2 years have been very hard for Mike. His health, a couple of falls, problems with his eyesight, and he was home most of the time, trips to the hospital and rehab. His grace and wit endured. He always expressed gratitude for his family, for his colleagues he worked with through the years, for dear friends, for his church. When I prayed with him the last time, he seemed at peace. I give thanks to God for Mike, for a life well lived, and for the promise that he is resting now in holy love and light.
Today to share in remembering Mike Nickel. I'm Thompson, Mike's stepson, and I'm glad so many of you were able to come today to celebrate his life in this place where he found great community and belonging. And I want to thank Cynthia and John and all the members of the church who've helped prepare this gathering. I know it will make Mike happy to see all of us feeling that same comfort and support in the place where he received so much. Although I've known Mike for over 25 years, I don't feel like I really ever understood him. We just didn't have that much in common. What we did share was the love for the same people. First, my mom, Darlene, and my two boys, Jacob and Ethan, his grandsons. And witnessing that love, I could see his devotion, caring, and thoughtfulness. He would spend great amounts of time making personalized gifts and experiences, whether it was planning a special night out on the town with my mother, spending hours creating a personalized gift wrapping for a special Christmas present, collecting photos and memories for a special book to remember their first 20 years together, or in the copious drafts of a letter to his grandson to mark a special day in his life. That care for others kept appearing as we prepared for today's event. I found he really did not have a very good system of organizing his address book, but he did have a Christmas card list, and it was quite extensive and filled with little reminders and notes about subjects to avoid or to specifically include to make that recipient feel special. So I sent cards all over the country and world, and I heard back from so many people where Mike had made a lasting impression on them. From his college newspaper co-editor, Virginia, who lives in Alaska, a note about how he pushed them to do their best work and then kept up a nearly 70-year friendship. Or another note from his friend Yuji of Japan about their enduring friendship that spanned decades, even while being separated by such a great distance. Mike was particular and unique. He saw himself as belonging to a different era, one of proper dress, jackets, and bow ties, of course, and etiquette. He idolized Fred Astaire with his effortless grace and style, and he was obsessed with the Art Deco era, collecting vintage clothing and accessories to wear to the annual Gatsby picnic. But he could also be so stubborn. He wasn't very happy this last year with needing extra help and support. He really just wanted to spend his time his way at home with his cat, quietly reading and watching his Huskies play football every Saturday each fall. But he did begrudgingly accept help in the end from me and his medical team, his wonderful neighbors, and his fantastic group of caregivers that made it all possible for him to return home for his final days. And although I've heard bits and pieces of stories from his life from before when we met, I'm hoping many of you will feel comfortable to share your version of Mike with us so we can all appreciate the many facets of what made him such a unique and caring person. Thank you.
Jacob. I am Mike's grandson, one of two. Sorry. The day of my grandmother's funeral, as we were burying her ashes, my grandfather, Mr. Mike Nickel, came up to me, patted me on the back, and said, "You're a good man." That meant the world to me, and it still does. I love my grandfather, but I didn't really know him. For example, just today I found out that he was a captain in the Air Force. No clue. By the time I met him, he had already lived 3/4 of his life. He had grown up, made friends, gone to college, partied ridiculously hard, I'm sure. He had a job, and then a career, and then retired. He had girlfriends, I assume, then a wife, a kid, another wife. He'd gone through hard times and good times. He lived my entire life trice-fold. He had so many stories to tell, and I will probably never know most of them. However, I did know him as a grandfather. I got to experience eating breakfast with him, his favorite meal, which for a celiac was tough. Playing tennis with him, which was, again, tough, not for him, but for me. Felt every single time we played, all of my skill was reset. I remember unwrapping Christmas gifts with him, which were always the best times of years, especially when he would one-up all of our presents with our grandmother's gift. We would get a toy, they would get a trip to the Bahamas. I got to know him as the quiet, smart, surprisingly funny, and of course, very classy man that he is. He gave me this jacket. But most importantly, I knew him as the man that loved my grandmother. I remember as a kid, there was one day that my grandparents picked me and my brother up to go spend the day with them. I remember as we were driving, right before we crossed the bridge, I sneezed. Mike said, "Bless you," as a man of God would. And I said, "Don't worry, I just have a little cold." My grandfather stopped the car, turned us around, and took us home. He could not risk my grandmother getting sick. It was the smart move, as kids are riddled with germs. I remember being sad after this for 2 reasons. The first reason was I was not sick at all. I just thought that's what you said when you sneezed. I did not realize that you could just normally sneeze. Never crossed my mind. But the second reason is it meant I could not spend the day with my grandparents as a family. And that was my favorite thing to do. All right. I may not know what he's gone through, but I know what that made him. The past is the past, but the present is nothing without it. And as the years go on, my grandparents, Mike Mickle and Darlene Thompson, will be my past, and my present is nothing without them. Thank you.
That's a tough act to follow. Okay, let's see, this looks daunting. Is it daunting? No. Hi, my name is Pat Martin. My friend Mike Nickel looked debonair in a bow tie. I met Mike when his first wife Nancy and I started working together in General Hospital in the 1980s, very early on. Ultimately, Nancy became my boss and my best friend. During the course of our friendship, we religiously walked around Corte Madera Creek 3 times a week for 5 years. As we walked, we shared a lot about ourselves, our fears, our joys. We talked about life and death. My husband and I saw Mike socially at wine tastings, often taking notes at Mike's instruction. He knew a lot about wine, by the way. We enjoyed black and white balls together and periodic casual dinners. But Mike was not an easy guy to get to know. In 1996, Nancy, in a matter of seconds, died of a spontaneous aneurysm. It was shocking, especially for Mike. They had been a loving and devoted couple for 37 years. Without immediate family around to help, Mike turned to me. So we went to the funeral parlor together, and we went to the cemetery together, and we planned Nancy's celebration. At that point, he shared some of his most personal thoughts, and it was kind of weird and often uncomfortable getting to know a person that way. My friend Mike Nickel looked debonair in a bow tie, and he wore them often. His vintage wardrobe was museum quality, and he relished the Art Deco Society picnics and galas. He and Nancy would get dressed up in their vintage clothing, and they'd go see Peter Minton. They'd go see Peter Minton at the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco. They would dance in kibitz. They had a great time. Mike Nickel loved Fred Astaire, and I think that he thought of Fred as his older brother. And when he had a puzzlement, he would stop and he would say, "What would Fred do?" And then he would figure it out, answer the question, and he would act appropriately. How fortunate was he when a longtime friend invited him for dinner at Darlene Thompson's home, where she was staying for a visit. Shortly thereafter, Darlene accompanied Mike to an Art Deco event beginning their romance and ultimate wedding. And I can still see Darlene toasting Mike with tears in her eyes, recounting the story of his coming to her class to learn how to tie a fancy bow tie for his wife Nancy. Darlene thought that was so loving and thoughtful. And now he was her husband. Mike had a kinship for kitties, a never-ending curiosity, a keen wit, and a mind like a steel trap. He painstakingly planned trips months in advance. I think he loved the planning as much, if not more, as much as the trip itself. Go Huskies. You can't say Mike Nickel without saying go Huskies. Mike nurtured long-term relationships, and he not only sent cards regularly, he wrote letters sharing his thoughts simply and honestly. Mike was a spiritual guy, but he was never, in the earlier years, he was not affiliated with a specific church. So in his meticulous way, he shopped around. He shopped around for a congregation that met his needs. And of course, he chose this one. He participated in various groups and was so grateful for the solace and kinship he found here. Along with being tremendously thoughtful, reasonably graceful on the dance floor, and most charming, Mike Nickel could also be stubborn as a rock. This seems to be a common theme. Tenacity is a fine quality, but when he said, "I'll take that into consideration," with that little smile on his lips, you knew that whatever you were planning was never going to happen. These last few years were tough for Mike. With Darlene's illness and passing, It grieved him immensely, and his diagnosis of celiac disease was daunting because he was no whiz kid in the kitchen. But I never once heard him complain. Thankfully, he had Alex, Rachel, Jacob, and Nathan. He was proud of you and spoke of you often in very loving terms. He, of course, treasured his visits with his daughter Ariel when she was here from her home in Greece. So as we think about it, Mike was very fortunate to have lived a life that was so tremendously full. I am grateful that Mike was a longtime friend of mine. So I hope you will join me as I visualize him now, nimbly dancing across the clouds, looking debonair in a tuxedo and a bow tie.
I'm Dinah McClure, a member of this congregation. It's been fun to hear what I've heard about Mike so far. It's through this church that I met Mike, and we got to be friends. From about 2 years after Hurricane Katrina, about a dozen of us from this church would go annually on a one-week mission trip somewhere in the United States where there had been a natural disaster. And we would do our best with all kinds of projects that we worked on. Mike was always interested in hearing where we were going, and then what did we do, what did we see, but we couldn't convince him to go until 2016. Our mission trip took us to northeastern central Washington, and he was in. We didn't see any bow ties either that whole time. No debonair business. We flew to Spokane, and then we had a 3+ hour drive northwest, almost to the Canadian border, to the middle of nowhere, where there'd been a raging wildfire that had done a tremendous amount of damage. We stayed in a little church not too far away. Once we got, on our way there, I was lucky enough to ride in the car that he was in. We rented vehicles and had at least two cars going. And that's when I learned about how he had met Darlene. He shared a lot. We also learned that his early journalism career had started up there. So he knew the area very well, and that's what got him to go with us. He took care of his celiac disease as well. He came with his own bread and never made a big to-do about anything at all. Once we got to Tonasket, the little town where we were going to work, our group was divided in two, and half of us had the interesting job, which none of us had ever done before, of planting 300 little seedlings. And Angela, if we could have the first slide, please. We were replacing those that had, the trees you can see have burned, but they're still there. Miraculously, the house survived the whole thing. So Mike and I were paired together, and it was really quite fun. I got to see his sense of humor as we worked with our post hole digger, our shovel, and our hands, working hard to do this job. In the second picture, I shouldn't be smiling. He was trying to recreate the Grant Wood picture of the farmer with his pitchfork on white. But I smiled. You can see he played his part perfectly. But he had that sense of humor, which was so great all the time. One day on our way back to our church where we were staying, we stopped at a little cemetery he had seen. Because he said, I think I have some relatives buried here. Okay. And actually, I was the one who asked the driver to please stop. Mike wasn't going to bother any of us to do that. Of course, we were thrilled to do it. We pulled off. Everybody got out, 5 or 6 of us. We all went in different parts of the cemetery because he had no idea really where they were. But he was the one who found the gravestones. I don't remember how they were related to him, but we were all very excited that that had happened. Well, we had done so well that we got these 300 trees planted in the first 3 days. So we needed another assignment. Well, they had to work, because we were supposed to, I guess, take all week to do them. What were we going to do? Well, we got sent off to our next assignment, and we were billed as a barbed wire fencing crew. Now, we were all seniors to start with. I don't think any of us had ever worked with barbed wire. And now we can have the second slide, please, Angela. It's a little bit hard to see, but we pulled up at the owner's house. Actually, it wasn't a house. They were living in mobile trailers because their home had been burned down. Their beautiful retirement home they had just finished when the wildfire went through. Anyway, we pulled up and the owner came out and he looked at this carload and he said, "Oh, I was kind of expecting a group of 25-year-old men." And we all laughed as well. But we are quick learners and we follow directions very well. He told us after our 2 days, we had accomplished more in 2 days than some 25-year-olds he had another season, because the 3 of them, each one was an expert. So they didn't get much done. Each one wanted to do it a different way. But those spools of barbed wire, if you've not ever worked with barbed wire, are 75 pounds. And we were trying to handle those. And you can perhaps see in that first slide that there's a slope off to the right-hand side. That's where the fence is that we're putting up there. This is so that the owner could bring his horses back. He had had to move them 2 times, at least 2 or 3 times, as the fire moved around and he wanted them home. So we were trying to string this wire. Mike was right in there. You didn't see any debonair dancing, debonair clothes, no bow ties. None of that. So it was, what I thought at least, quite out of character for what Mike was doing. But he was a good sport about the whole thing. Lastly, we got to see his love of animals. At the first place we were, there was a German Shepherd. Mike was good friends with a German Shepherd in no time. And then this cat that he's holding like a baby, this is at the second place. You can see a couple of the trailers where the people were living while we were doing the work and they were deciding what they were going to do. Anyway, he had just met this cat, just picked her up, he's holding her, talking to her like a baby, and she's as happy as she can be. I knew how much he loved cats, but I didn't realize it really extended to lots of other animals as well. We were all so glad to have Mike with us on that trip. I kept Darlene abreast during the week by sending pictures of these things that Mike was doing, that Mike had never done before, nor had we, but it was more impressive that Mike was doing those. We got to see a different side of Mike from what we'd seen before. And I miss him, we all miss him, but I just love having these pictures and these happy memories of the time. And we were so glad he went with us. He wore his Presbyterian Disaster Assistance blue t-shirt with great pride when we all showed up when we do our presentation to the church after we're back. So it's fun to get to hear more about it from the rest of you as well. Thank you.
Mike Nickel was my buddy in the spirituality program here at First Pres. Since I was given the nod to inaugurate it by our pastor then, Bob Conover, back at the turn of the century. As many of you know, at that time, spirituality was not prominent in Presbyterian circles. I advertised meditation on Wednesday mornings when I started my job, and thank heavens Mike Nickel showed up to keep me from sitting there all alone. We We met for many Wednesdays, the two of us. He would always put on his black gloves in preparation. I never asked him why. I learned so much in those sessions with Mike, with sessions without words, the power of shared silence and our mutual surrender to mystery. Mike specialized in both silence and mystery. I'll speak about silence first. As our group, our meditation group, grew gradually from 2 to 5 to 8 and more, we started adding a Lectio Divina, which is divine reading. It's a short reading through which we hope to hear the voice of God speaking in our hearts. And then we shared afterwards. All of us except Mike. I would sometimes intrude on his privacy by asking him for a response. Would you like to add something, Mike? No. Which he offered with no apology and not a hint of irritation. Just a matter of fact, no. There were about 20 years of Wednesday mornings like that. We were all learning the sweetness of silence in those mornings. I think Mike was leading the way in our sensing into the power of connection without words. I suspect that he had been practicing silence for many years. But when Mike did speak or write, as many of you have already noted, it was priceless, worth waiting for. Many of us received his distinctive handwritten notes, usually of appreciation or a joke or something, a tease. And we will all attest to Mike's wonderful wit and elegant writing style. To the mystery. Mike was Mr. Mystery. One of the hoped-for goals in the spirituality program is to explore our inner worlds, our inner life, to awaken to the presence of God within, and to share all that richness that we discover. But Mike's inner life was off limits. No entry, no key, no password. So I learned the precious lesson from Mike during those years, and it's a lesson that's been invaluable to me in my 61 years of marriage to my husband. Allow the mystery. Don't probe. Don't second guess. Don't trespass. Instead, be present, respectful, appreciative. Surrender to the gift of not knowing. It's the path to spaciousness and trust. Those years for me with Mike were always a treat and sometimes a surprise. He taught me to make gorgeous bows to wrap Christmas gifts. He introduced me to the 42nd Moon musical productions in San Francisco. He suggested I join him for poetry appreciation at College of Marin. As the late Buddhist teacher Ram Dass so wonderfully wrote about the soul of friendship, the truth really comes down to this. We are all just walking each other home. Mike, it was a privilege to be one of the friends who walked home with you. I love to imagine how sweet it is for you to finally be home.
Now I'm going to invite anyone who'd like to share. Angela is going to bring a handheld mic around. If you raise your hand, please stand where you are and let us know who you are. Angela, maybe come down to center first, and let's maybe start with this side, but we can go back and forth. And just remember to hold the mic close to you. Please stand if you can.
My name's Lisa, and I'm a member of this church. And during the pandemic, Cynthia had the wisdom and enthusiasm to create an online study during the season of Lent, where we were going to be reading poems by Wendell Berry each week and discussing them with a partner. After I learned that on one Zoom call, the very next morning I got an email from Mike, and he said, "Will you be my Wendell Berry partner?" And I was just thrilled. And so we met on the phone and by email for the next, I don't know how many weeks Lent is in this moment, but and we talked about poetry. More often we talked about things and sadness and the isolation of the pandemic. And I remember Mike saying, we were talking about sadness, and he said, "I just want to feel useful. I just want to feel like I have a purpose still. I want to feel useful." And so I took a moment during one of our calls to tell him how helpful he had been to me. He had talked to me about meditation. He did tell me a little bit about where he goes in meditation. And he had talked to me about faith and Christ, and I thanked him for these things. I said, "You've always been useful to me." And he said, "I knew you were just doing this to use me."
Hi, I'm Lowell, and I just want to let you know, Mike was one heck of a newspaper man. I was a colleague of Mike back to Hayward in the 1970s. A lot of us are no longer here, but it was a long time ago, 50 years ago. But there are three of us here from Hayward, and I think that tells a little bit how much Mike meant to all of us. He was the best boss I ever had. He was the assistant managing editor. I was the sports editor at the time. The 1970s was a heyday. I don't know if two young men here, Jacob and Nathan, if you guys even know what a newspaper is. But anyway, it was so much fun working under Mike. I have saved one letter in my whole professional career. And it was from Mike Nichol. When he left the Daily Review for the IJ Independent Journal, he wrote me a letter saying that it was a pleasure working with me and thanked me for making his job easier. But that's the kind of guy he was. He was so giving. We've stayed in touch. I've seen him several times, and we always exchange Christmas cards. And he had the decency never to tease me too much about going to Cal, because the Bears are never as good as the Huskies.
I'm Don Buckholz, and I was at the Daily Review, and the the papers we, well, it's the Bay Area News Group now. And I started at the Review in 1963, and I was there till 2008 when I went to Henderson to look after my mom. But anyway, when I started there as a copy boy, rolling ticker tape, and then whacking up the stories as it came in on the Associated Press and United Press International teletypewriters, the paper was about this wide and about 5 miles long, and we ran out of paper. But anyway, from the very beginning, Mike helped me to be a copy boy, better reporter, better editor, better person. And I can't think of anything negative to say about it. And he did a lot of good things. The kind of person he was. I remember when I was at Cal State Hayward, and I was in a class that was I'm kind of memory logical. I'm kind of losing memory. But anyway, it was a class that it was called, I'm trying to think of it. It was Advanced Expository Writing. And I wasn't losing my memory back then. But anyway, I was doing quite well, and the professor read more of my stuff than anybody else's. And anyway, at one point he said that I'd done something wrong, and I couldn't, I disagreed. And I took it to Mike, and Mike said, well, you're wrong, your professor's right. And the next day, he came back with 2 books, he said, you're right, we were wrong. That was the kind of person I was. It wasn't a bad consequence, but that's the kind of person he was. And I'll leave it at that. Oh.
My name is Carrie, and I wrote what I have to say out. My name is Carol Mills, and I also am a former employee of the Daily Review. I wrote what I have to say because I'm not a good speaker, so I will read my contribution. I have to take off my glasses. I came to the Bay Area in 1970, as we sometimes did in those days. I started hoofing it to look for a job by walking into a place and asking for an interview. One of those places I walked into was the Daily Review in Hayward. That was when I first met Mike. By some miracle, I got the interview on the spot and was hired as a general assignment reporter. Mike interviewed me and hired me. Thus began my 9-year stay at the Daily Review, during which most of the time I worked directly for Mike. He was city editor when I started, and Chuck Peterson was the managing editor. Looking back, I realized those years are the ones in my career that I remember with the most fondness and nostalgia. Maybe it has something to do with youth, but it had much to do with Chuck and Mike, both of whom were great editors and great human beings. I learned much from both of them. Mike had a heart for the ordinary person, and eventually one of the assignments he gave me was a feature series on the common man, quote unquote. Today we would say the common person. I would randomly knock on doors till I found a family willing to be interviewed in detail about their day-to-day life, and have the story published in the newspaper. Mike loved that series, but he didn't find favor with Floyd Sparks, who was the publisher at the time, so it didn't last very long. I really don't consider Mike a common man because he was exceptional in many ways. One of those ways was that throughout the years he would call me on my birthday. This year the call won't come. I'm sorry he is gone, and that we have lost another good human being.
Hi, my name is Deborah, and there are about a dozen of us here from the IJ. Some of them are wearing bow ties the way that Mike wore them by the end of the day, undone. But I just wanted to thank Hayward for sending us Mike.
Yeah, my name is Scott, and like Deborah, I work with Mike at the IJ. I came on as a photo editor, and you always knew when we were off the floor, meaning the paper was into production, when Mike's tie was loose. So if you looked out and saw that, you know there was no point in approaching with a photograph or any updates. But my favorite Nickel story, in a weak moment, I admitted that I was interested in Art Deco. Just architecture. And Mike, oh really? So he pulled up pictures of himself and Nancy at the Art Deco picnic with vintage cars, and they had their clothing on. And he said, maybe you'd like to come. And we could use a photographer. And I said, he said, do you have a tuxedo? And I said, yes, I do. And he said, do you have a speed graphic camera? And I said, no, I don't. He goes, never mind.
Hi, I'm Donna Horowitz, and I knew Mike from the IJ too. And so I came there when it was in the building a few blocks from here, which no longer exists. And so I started in 1979. Had about 4 years experience. And after not long, I went to the Mill Valley office, which no longer exists either. And at first, I was a pretty young reporter, but first I was a little uneasy because he was so quiet, but he was very respectful. He didn't, some editors are heavy-handed. You don't recognize your story when it comes out. He wasn't like that at all. And so if you had a question, once in a while, you'd have a question, you'd ask it, but most of the time he let you, was respectful and let you do your thing. So, I appreciated that in him. He was good for a young reporter. Anyway, just wanted to give you a little idea of what it was like.
After Mom Devon, one of the people from the East Bay who didn't work at the Daily News. I was more often a subject because I worked for the largest employer in Castro Valley at the time, Eden Hospital, and I worked with his wife, first wife, Nancy, and my ex-wife, and my current wife. We've gone to many Gatsby picnics at the Dunsmuir House with Nancy and Mike. And we traveled to Hong Kong and India, all over India. We went to my cousin's wedding, so enjoyed the experience. But my favorite story is of Mike. We stayed in touch over the years. Commiserated with me about when my parents died. He liked them both, met them and spent time with them here and in India. And we talked at least once a year. He'd send me a card, and we'd send him a card. Darlene and Linda, my wife, and Mike and I, we'd go to dinner about once every other year or something, about once a year. Sometimes here, sometimes in the East Bay. And we did talk about the A's once in a while and commiserate about their fate, what they were doing. He was a fan, I guess, after those Huskies. But my favorite story is about a shared love of wine. We have wine tastings at their house. Pat mentioned some of those. There were always blind tastings. It was interesting. And we discovered that we liked wine we didn't think we liked sometimes. Interesting to learn. But first one, Nancy and I taught a class because we went to a class and people wanted to go from me. So why don't you teach the class? I said, well, that's something. So we decided to do that and duplicate it. We said, we want to talk about Zinfandel, just at least recently thought of as a uniquely California grape. And Mike and Nancy both would buy every Sutter Home made Zinfandel in those days, well-known Sutter Home, a case of it every year. He would not part with it. Talk about stubbornness. So we said, it'd be nice to get a couple of years of those. I did a present value. I was a finance guy, so I did a present value study and said, here's what we'll pay you for 2 bottles of Zinfandel, which he finally agreed to part with Nancy. And in our class, we opened it. And it got malolactic fermentation. And it was not good. So the next day, Mike called me and said, would you like about 10 bottles? He did not have good luck with wine and with me specifically. We used to be in a dinner brunch group, and they were going to brunch. We were in the city. I used to teach at Cochran-Carney finance. So we had their recognition. They used to pay us almost nothing, paid for gas, but we were honored with a dinner once a year with the faculty, the visiting faculty. So it was the night before, so I said, I didn't have a chance to buy champagne for a brunch. Would you bring a bottle? So Mike and Nancy had bid on a case of champagne at KQED wine auction. And they had opened 11 bottles. They were all flat. So he said, with this half smile, he said, let's take that bottle from Deb. So then we get to the brunch, and I said, okay, I have this bottle of champagne. I have to confess that Mike and Nancy got it for me because I didn't get a chance to go get it. And we opened it, and it popped. And there were bubbles. Yes, Mike. He was ready to take his bow tie off. I have fond memories of Mike. I'll miss him.
My name is John Steiner. I'm the pianist for the 8:30 service here, or since the turn of the century, more or less. Mike came for many years, but I just want to say a few words about, it was mentioned about the Presbyterian disaster, the assistance thing. The crab feed went on here in February. It was a fundraiser every February with a fresh crab and wine and music, and I would play piano with most recently Denise Warmby. And Mike always loved the music, the Great American Songbook, and he'd always compliment me and dress dapper. And I learned so much about folks. I played many memorials, and I forgot about the cards he would send. He always sent a card, a thank you card, handwritten, very nice words and stuff. But, so all that stuff, born in 1930, is amazing music at the time that was in our history. But when it came to hymns, like church hymns, it was different. So, and at the 8:30 many years ago, like sometimes Mike would walk up and comment after the service. And he'd come up to me and say, I wrote some stuff down, and he'd say something like, what was that awful hymn you sang? and then I'd say, after sharing the title, I'd claim it as in saying, don't blame me, I didn't write it. In any case, he was such a, like I said, I really didn't know him that well, but I saw him for so many years at church events. But I'm learning so much about him today, so, and I'm enjoying playing like music that he loved too. And so, anyway, great to be here.
Thank you. I'm Ellie Mednick, and I met Mike Nickel in 1972 when I was a neophyte marketing director at the Marin Symphony, writing my first press releases, which I would in those days trot over from the Marin Symphony offices on 4th Street to the IJ offices on 4th Street, and tenderly give him my writing, which he would critique silently, and then with a few acerbic words would say something like, perhaps a little adjustment might be good. So he became my press release mentor for many, many years. We adored one another because he immediately told me that he was Fred Astaire. And I said, that's strange because I'm Ginger Rogers. I was a dancer. And he said, really? And so our dream was for years and years to dance together, which we did, which culminated in a little festival, Fred Astaire, that I presented at the Lark Theater, where I am now, and invited Mike to come. So we had our dream on film, never in reality. I will miss him greatly. Thank you.
I'll be quick. My name is Scott. I'm one of the neighbors in San Anselmo, where Mike lived 2 houses away. And I don't go back to the turn of the century even with him, or the last century. I met him about a dozen years ago when my wife Tony and I moved in to the neighborhood. And we started having these regular neighborhood parties with folks in the area, and some of us are here today. And that's when we got to know Mike and discovered his diversity of interests and his very charming personality. And most of that has already been discussed, so there's no point in rehashing that. Obviously, the one thing that I haven't heard anybody say yet is what a Renaissance man he was. And I really think that's true, because I've heard from all of you today about the wonderful thank you cards, which we've experienced, his love of Art Deco, his tonsorial splendor, for lack of a better term, and the Art Deco jazz interest that he had. But what no one's talked about yet is the Jaguar. All right, so he was a car guy, loved classic cars. He was an E-Type, by the way. So we had that in common. And the other thing that he and I had in common was a love of classical music. And so Mike used to come with us to the chamber concerts at the Music in the Vineyards. And I think it was more than just the wine that appealed to him there. I think it was actually the classical music as well, because he was very knowledgeable about that. So we will definitely miss going to our concerts together with Mike, and we'll miss him as a neighbor and a friend.
My name is Sue, and I met Mike through my parents, who went to all sorts of Art Deco picnics, big band things. My father loved Mike very much, and they did all sorts of things together. I was lucky enough to be included on one New Year's Eve with, I'm pretty sure it was Nancy and Mike, at the Meadow Club, so that was a lot of fun. But the biggest thing that Mike did for us was to take care of my father and visit him when he was sick. And then for 7 years, he visited my mother whenever he had a chance, and brought her a special dessert every single time. I knew Mike had visited when I'd get there and there was still a goodie in the refrigerator. She didn't eat very many of them, but she treasured it. She treasured her friendship with him, and I did too, because when she died, well, when my father died, he helped us write the obituary and put it in the IJ. And then when my mother died, he came to her service, which was, of course, in COVID, was out at the Alima Cemetery where they're both buried. And I suggested yellow. And so he came in his dapper outfit with a lovely yellow rose boutonniere. And I brought yellow roses to throw in with my mother. And Mike threw his boutonniere in and then gave me a massive planter box with flowers that would attract butterflies and hummingbirds, my mother's favorite things. So Mike is very dear to me. Thank you.
And now let us enjoy a wonderful slideshow of Mike's very full life. us in prayer. Gracious and loving God, we thank you for all those who have finished their race and who now rest from their labors. We are grateful for those dear to us who have died and rest now in your eternal love. Today, we especially thank you for Mike Nickel. We are grateful for him, for his joy, his love of his family and friends, his kindness, his humor, his skills as a journalist and editor, his openness to deeper truths and an evolving spiritual life. May we learn from him what it means to live fully. We are grateful he is at home with you. Amen. I invite you to stand for the benediction. I'll lead the family out, and please come to the reception. Go out this day assured of God's love for you. Go in that peace, go in that light, giving thanks for Mike and what he taught us, that we too might embrace the gifts of this life and reflect that love and light. Amen.